Hello, everybody. We live in strange times, the times of AI manifestos. They're flooding the zone, according to my old friend Scott Rosenberg. The latest AI manifestos from the CEO of Anthropic, one of the multi-billion-dollar AI startups. Dario Amodei has a new long piece out, Machines of Loving Grace. All these AI manifestos claim to be original. Of course, they're not. Almost 100 years ago, a man called John Maynard Keynes, the famous Lord Keynes, the father of Keynesian economics, wrote an interesting piece called The Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. 10 years ago in the New Yorker, Elizabeth Colbert, writing about it, suggested that Keynes was thinking about a world 100 years from 1928, 2028, of course, a time when apparently our grandchildren or our great-grandchildren would only need to work 3 hours a week. It's an interesting idea, Keynes and AI, and one man who knows both intimately is our guest today, Robert Skidelsky, a lord, British lord, is best known perhaps as the biographer of Keynes. He's written many books. His single volume, John Maynard Keynes, 1883 to 1946, is, I think, considered still the most authoritative book about Keynes's life. And Skidelsky now has a new book out. It's called Mindless: The Human Condition in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. He is casting his insights into a world where everyone seems obsessed with AI. Robert Skidelsky is joining us from his office in Westminster, his House of Lords office. Robert, congratulations on the new book. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Apologies for the rather long-winded introduction. But there is a connection, isn't there, between Keynes and AI, which I'm guessing was one of the reasons you decided to write Mindless.
Yes, you're quite right. I think it was Keynes's view that technology would be liberating. That, in a nutshell, is what he thought. And liberating in the sense that if machines took over routine work, then that would free up humans for all kinds of higher level activities. This was, of course, before the days of AI. This was writing in 1930. But of course, there'd been a century of mechanization, industrialization, and of course, factory machines. And he thought that what would happen was that humans would have to work less and less. Machines would do more and more of the work. Therefore, the time humans would have to work would be reduced and reduced. And finally, in 100 years after that, that is, he was writing in 1930, and 100 years after 1930, we would only have to work 3 hours a day and 15 hours a week. As he put it, to satisfy the old Adam in us, which is an interesting theological glance. But the point is, we'd be so rich on 15 hours a week that we wouldn't have to work anymore, and that was his prediction for the future. Now, it hasn't come to pass. It's sort of, partly come to pass, because we do work less per week than we did in 1930, but not nearly as much less as he thought we would. We don't only have to work 3 hours a day, most of us, to earn our keep. We have to work quite a lot longer. So the question is, why hasn't his prediction worked in the way he thought? What was wrong with it? And I think that's one of the questions I ask in my book. Hello? Hello, I don't know whether I should go on, but I will go on. I thought I'd answered your question. The thing that might have gone wrong I think, is, well, there are two things that might have gone wrong. One is that we have had two world wars. Well, we'd had one world war and a lot of and quite a big depression since he wrote in 1930. And the new twist in the argument, of course, is that we now have automation, and automation has made huge inroads not only into the manual work, which Keynes was mainly writing about, but also into our mental work, our cognitive work, so that we're getting into a position where machines can take over not only the old kind of factory work that they were taking over, but office work as well. And once they take over cognitive work, the work of the brain as well as the work of the muscle, the question then arises: what is it that we can do that machines can't do? And what is it that we can do that machines can't do better than us? And it's at that point that the real question of whether we're replaceable or not becomes very, very urgent. Because if machines can do everything that we can do better than we can, what is there for us to do? Hello? Hello? Oh dear.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now, Robert?
Yeah, I made a long reply, but then there was nothing.
Okay, I'm going to repeat the question. Robert, is this a utopian or a dystopian vision? Are you scared of a future where machines think better than us? Or is it something that will liberate us, something we should look forward to?
Keynes certainly thought it was liberating, because he thought that machines would be able to take over most of our routine work, freeing our energies for higher things. But on the other hand, that was before automation, really. And the new twist in the argument is that machines have increasingly encroached on our cognitive work, our cognitive ability. And if, it used to be machines taking the place of muscles. Now it's a question of machines taking the place of brains. If they can do everything we can do, but only better than we can do it, what place is there left for us? They say, okay, well, in that case, we can do more and more creative things. But the evidence is that machines can do most of those creative things as well, like write music, write poetry, texts, whatever you mention. So that then suggests that we are replaceable. There's no future for us except maybe as pets for our new masters.
Is that what we deserve, Robert? We've always invented things, technologies which are replaceable. We've created pets. We've reinvented other species. Why shouldn't that happen to ourselves?
Well, you mean it might be open to us to outperform machines or to stop machines. I mean, that seems to me to be an issue. But you see, in order to believe that we can outperform machines and continue to outperform machines, we've got to believe something else, which I don't think many people do believe anymore, which is that the mind, our unique quality of mind, cannot be reduced to brain. Because if it can be reduced to brain, if all our mind is a sort of complicated piece of neurological machinery, then in principle that can be replicated. It's just a question of capturing the code, breaking the code. If that can be done, then machines are in charge. So what we've got to believe is that the mind is something unique to us. It's what used to be called the soul. and it can't be reduced to a complicated piece of machinery. Because again, you see, I go back to this argument. If the only difference between ourselves and a pig is that we have a more complicated neural system than the pigs, then in a way, we can't go on transcending the capabilities of technology.
I wonder, Robert, whether this is a new philosophical problem. It seems as if it was an issue that was brought up by Bentham and his utilitarians in the 19th century. The idea of ourselves as calculating machines of pain and pleasure. And of course, there was both progressive and conservative pushback on that. Is this a new debate?
No, well, some of it is very old indeed, and it's not specific to the world of work. It's to do with controlling us. If you go back to Bentham, he had this idea of a panopticon, which was a prison system in which you had a central tower which is rather like a lighthouse, and that could shed a light on all the surrounding cells, so that the prison governor could see what was going on in the prison, but the prisoners couldn't see the controller. And that was a bit of technology. I mean, it was based on the invention of sort of electricity or some power, electric power of some kind, and it was an ideal utopia. It was the idea of utopia as a prison, an ideal prison, in which you wouldn't have to actually have any guards because you'll be able to see what was going on. And the sort of that then, of course, developed into the horror of utopia, the dystopia of surveillance in Orwell's 1984, where you have again you have Big Brother who sees everyone and controls everyone else, but no one can see Big Brother. So all that was foreshadowed in Bentham, and it comes out of something very, very old, which is governments have always spied on their people, and it's just a question of the technology of spying has been enormously enhanced by artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it seems as if AI perhaps won't destroy government jobs. Perhaps it was no coincidence that Bentham's brother, Samuel Bentham, worked for Catherine the Great, and the Panopticon came out of a project to create a kind of pre-industrial authoritarian state. So maybe Bentham is really the father of surveillance capitalism.
Maybe he is, yeah.
Let's go back to Keynes. What would Keynes make of our current situation? Do you think he would be amused, troubled, intrigued, encouraged?
He'd be, like I think all very, intelligent and far-sighted people should be, very worried, because first of all, worried in two respects. First of all, we are mired in a sort of recession, and his insights into what caused economies to stagnate have been largely abandoned. So that would be a cause of worry. We're not growing to anything like our potential, and it was absolutely central to his view of the good life to come that we should actually get over the hump of necessity as quickly as we could. In fact, we're stuck in the world of necessity, and we haven't actually yet moved to the world of abundance, in which we could sort of give up work more and more. In fact, a lot of people have to work. There's masses of people. It's not a question that it's not a question of them giving up work. They often have to work more and more and harder. And many people who are only on part-time jobs would prefer full-time jobs. So one of the things there you'd need to point out is the big growth in inequality, which I think he probably didn't anticipate. He thought the fruits of the machine would be distributed much more widely than it turned out was possible. The other thing that would worry him now, I think, is that we're moving into a state of war, and when you have a lot of money spent on arms and defense, that's a form of waste. It wastes resources, and if you have very high military expenditure, um, it keeps resources artificially scarce. I mean, it wastes. I mean, defense expenditure is a form of consumption. Quite simply, it's a form of useless consumption. It's not a form of production. It's not an investment into a more productive economy. And what I think he would have been worried about today is how the world is moving back into an era of anticipating war, and therefore, in other words, turning its face away from the tasks of peace, which he thought a technology would open up.
So we live, Robert, in the way you're presenting it and the way you're imagining Keynes would think of it, in a very odd world where on the one hand we have this almost magical technology where machines can think as well, perhaps better than we can. On the other hand, we have all the old problems, the problems of war, the problems of inequality. Also, you've written about this extensively, a paranoia about immigration, whether it's in Europe or in the United States, more and more obsession with the scarcity of land and the cult of the nation state. How do we make sense of that? On the one hand, everything's new. On the other hand, everything is incredibly old. I know you write about this in Mindless. This is the contradiction at the heart of our current predicament, isn't it?
Yes, and it leads to a rather gloomy culmination. It's very, very hard to be optimistic about where we're heading. I talk in my last chapter about the four horsemen of the apocalypse, and the four horsemen are nuclear war, climate change, pandemics, and our dependence on networks which we don't understand and which could stop. And if they stopped, that would be the end of civilization as we know it. So there's four horsemen of the apocalypse. They each have the capacity to wipe us out.
I'm guessing you've read your colleague in the House of Lords, Martin Rees. He's been on the show several times. Another rather pessimistic futurist. He's not going to survive the 21st century. Do you agree with Martin? Might we not? I mean, Keynes was writing at the beginning of, or in 1928 about 2028. Are we going to get to 2128, Robert?
Well, not necessarily. Not at all. Not in the form we are. Not with the civilization we now have. It's interesting that on the nuclear front, the predictions of the Doom machine, which was set up in 1948, which gives humanity another its future time. It's down to about 7 seconds now in the time they count, having started with several minutes. In other words, we're nearer to extinction or doom than we were at any time since the machine, which reflects the predictions of the most distinguished scientists in the world since it was set up. Now that is a very, very I mean, it is a very gloomy prospect, because we no longer, just to concentrate on that, we no longer have the rules. We no longer have rules of the game by which we can actually regulate nuclear competition and avert avert nuclear weapon use. We no longer have the rules. We, at least after the Cuba crisis, we developed a set of rules in which, the two sides, the two main antagonists could talk to each other. We no longer have any of that.
Robert, where are you when it comes to this debate about AI and the existential threat? Martin Rees deals with this. There are many pessimists who believe that we will become footnotes to machines that are smarter than us, and that AI will, to borrow a term of a best-selling book, be our last invention. Do you believe that we're on the verge of technology that will essentially, quote unquote, employ us, although we won't actually be paid, probably because we'll be enslaved to it?
Yeah, I think so. I think that is right. It's then a question of, I mean, the phrase is that the last decision that we can make independent, the decision to go forward to artificial intelligence and develop it is the last decision we will independently make as human beings. After that, the decision making will be taken over by the machines we have created, which will be more intelligent than we are. Then the question is, what will the view of the machines be about us? Will they regard us as slaves, as you just said, or will they simply destroy us? In other words, will they have our interests at heart? And what will our interests, or what should our interests be? There is a school of thought, which is the transhumanists, who believe that before this final point of singularity comes, we need to equip the machines with ethical principles such that they will look after us, that they will treat us well. But I don't think that's realistic, actually. I mean,
no, to put it mildly, what do you think of the transhumanists, Robert? The Ray Kurzweils, these types of people in Silicon Valley? I'm sure you've read their work. You may have even talked to them.
I mean, they're mad. I mean,
to put it politely, right?
Yeah, they're mad. It's utilitarianism gone mad. Because
it's Bentham gone mad. I mean, Bentham's still staring out at us, if you see, in his old chair. He's still around. He's still alive. So what are we going to do about it, Robert? You're a lord. You're a member of the House of Lords. You're a man whose life is a proof of agency, remarkable achievements. You're still involved in public life. Do we need to just regulate new companies like Anthropic and their CEO, who talks about machines of loving grace? Do we need to take the European model? Or does some of this technology need to be outlawed? Like some people talked about outlawing nuclear technology in the 1940s.
Yeah, well, you see, there were at all times. I mean, the idea, the reigning idea is that what can be invented can't be stopped. And yet, at all times, there were people who wanted to stop inventions. Historically, of course, there have been many inventions that have been stopped. The Chinese, interestingly enough, stopped lots of inventions from being applied. They knew about gunpowder, they knew about printing, long before it came to the West, but they didn't use it. And that was a case of non-application. You knew something, but for one reason or another, the authorities were strong enough, or perhaps stupid enough, to prevent its use. Now, I think when nuclear weapons were invented, particularly when it came to thermonuclear weapons, there were many scientists who said we should stop, we should not go on. But of course, the seduction of going on was huge because it was an arms race. And if you didn't go on, the other guy would go on. And therefore you would lose out. And that is very much the mood today. If we don't go on improving our technology, improving our AI, then the malign powers, Russia, China, and so on, will then get a lead over us, and they'll be able to destroy us. I mean, so the idea of regulation falls foul of the geopolitical competition. Unless all the actors who have technological potential agree that certain things shouldn't be allowed, and agree on a set of regulations, then there will be no regulation. It'll be a pipe dream. If you regulate in one area, it'll just migrate somewhere else. So I mean that's where the hot air aspect of regulation comes in, or rather I should say that's one area where it comes in. The other area is, on what basis are you going to regulate? What is the agreed good of humans in the name of which you need to regulate? That is a question that we can't answer with our rather thin moral sense that a secular thinking gives us. And that's why and in the end, at the end of my book, I say quite plainly, we actually need a theological basis to any kind of decent regulation. We need to ask moral questions. What is it what is good about humans? Why are humans worth preserving? Why is humanness worth preserving? Why can't we all look forward to a zombie future in which we're very, very intelligent zombies? Or rather, we don't exist in a human form any longer. Why can't we look forward to that with appreciation and hope? Well, because we're human. I mean, that's why.
But what does human mean? I mean, for you, if you didn't need to work, I'm sure you'd continue to write books and read books and make speeches and do shows like this. For some people, they didn't need to work. They'd watch TV all day and fill themselves with unhealthy food, and perhaps sleep all day. Can one make rules about what it is to be human, Robin?
No, you can't make rules, but you can actually give people an idea of what a life is that's worth living. I mean, a worth living life. I mean, the Greeks had a name for it, eudaimonia. It's a sort of that sort of life you've described is possible, and if people are sufficiently blunted in their senses or their appreciation of life, they could easily slip into it. But it's not what gives them. It's not a life that gives people satisfaction. It's not a life that actually gives humans the belief that they are fulfilling their destiny, their possibilities, and therefore. In order for people not to slip too easily into that kind of life, they've got to have some idea of what the purpose of life is. And that seems to me the role of education, but specifically of a religious view of the world. Because if you don't have that, what is it that's worth doing?
Did Keynes have a religious view of the world? You've written, when one thinks of Keynes, one always thinks of the alternative to Keynesianism, neo-monetarism. You've written about Milton Friedman, and you've asked whether he's an economic visionary or scourge of the world. Is the difference between the Keynesian school and the neoliberals, the Friedmanites, that there's room in Keynesianism for theology, but not in Friedman, or at least in Friedman, the theology is the market itself?
Yeah, that's a very important question. You see, I think for Keynes, economics was a branch of applied ethics. It was a system of applied ethics. So where does he get his ethics from? Not from traditional religion, because he's one of those early generation of non-believers. His parents were immensely religious. I mean, his grandfather was a Baptist minister, and a lot of his language is religious. It comes out of the Bible. It comes out of the religious tradition of the West. But he himself wasn't religious. But he did have a religion, and it was in a book which made a great influence on him as a young man, G.E. Moore's Principia Ethica, the Principles of Ethics. And these Moore didn't derive them specifically from a religion, but they were fundamentally a religious set, because he said you knew they were right. It wasn't something you could prove. This was the idea of what's good. You couldn't define what's good, you knew it. And how did you come to know it? For Moore, you just did, because you were a member of this kind of society and this civilization. You knew intuitively what was good. And for Keynes, that was his his religion, and the purpose of life was the good life was a life devoted to learning, friendship, and beauty. I mean, friendship coming first. By friendship, I mean your relations with your fellows, and beauty was an essential element. So these were his ideas of the good life, which he thought most people would share probably, and which he hoped technology would enable to be realized.
Some people might be listening to this, Robert, and thinking this is just an example of the elitism, cultural economic of the Bloomsbury set, that Keynes was a wealthy man. He spent his life doing basically whatever he wanted. He invested smartly, so he never really needed to work. Can this ideal, which is, you said, goes back to the Greeks, which amongst the Greeks for Aristotle was also an idea of the elites, can this be democratized? Can it be made accessible to everybody?
Well, why not? I mean, unless you believe that the elite is an elite because it's more intelligent or superior in some way to the mass of people, if you believe that, then of course it can't be democratized, and the number of saints in the world will be it'll be a minority. But I don't believe that. I don't see why the ideal of a good life shouldn't be appreciated and grasped by more and more people as economic circumstances make it possible for them to live it. I mean, I don't see why. I mean, if unless you think that most people are incapable of living any kind of life if they're free from work, than the life you describe, which is one of just watching TV all day long and sort of, I don't know, being
on the internet, being on Facebook. Robert, your life is a remarkable one. You're going to be perhaps best remembered, or you are remembered for your biography of Keynes, for your ability to represent the good life of someone else. Is there something particularly, perhaps you use this word, I use it carefully, theological about the biographer? Are you creating value out of other people's lives?
Yeah. Well, I hope so. I hope to. Yes, you ask a question about biography. What is the justification of biography itself? I mean, biography is a matter of translating, isn't it? Translating a life, which would otherwise be inaccessible, because it would be forgotten. It would be, somewhere in the past, and bringing it into the world of today. And I hope I've done that with Keynes. I hope I've given people a justification for knowing about Keynes, and giving Keynes a justification for continuing to live. I mean, that's of course a very ambitious goal, and I'm not as able, I'm not as clever as Keynes. I'm not as brilliant.
Nobody is these days. Is there anyone as smart as Keynes in the 2020s, Robert?
Yeah, there are some very, very smart people around, aren't there?
Is there anyone, though, you think economically, intellectually, in the caliber of Keynes today?
No, I wouldn't say so. There were, because you see, again, it's an epochal matter. If you look at the 20th century, it seems to me there were three great economists in the 20th century. I mean, one was Keynes, the other was Hayek.
Yeah.
And the third, to my way of thinking, was Schumpeter. But I mean, I rank Milton Friedman a little bit lower, but I mean, he was certainly, if you want four, he would be there. So these were very, very great. These were very, very great thinkers, because they come from a different tradition. Their background was not economics. Their background was philosophy, history.
Right. Schumpeter's an interesting one. He brought together perhaps the world of Keynes and the 19th century world of Marx. Marx also, in his German ideology, wrote about a world where we'd be free from technology. He promised that we could famously fish in the morning and write poetry in the afternoon. Should we be going back to Marx, Robert, as much as Keynes in terms of making sense of this potentially cornucopian age?
It's the big challenge, I think, to sort of find a way of bringing Marx and Keynes together. They both saw important bits of the truth, but not perhaps um, enough of the whole. You see, for Marx, you got to your state of fisherman, fishing in the morning and writing poetry in the afternoon by abolishing capitalism. There had to be a struggle, and that struggle would culminate in the abolition of the capitalist system. Whereas Keynes thought capitalism would evolve into a more public, spirited system. So that, and you didn't have to have a class struggle. What you had to have, he thought, was just simply the rule of intelligence. And if there were enough intelligent people around, they could sort of shape the evolution of capitalism in a humane direction. Of course, Marx was very skeptical about this. So he just simply disbelieved that. He believed that you were dealing with questions of power, not with questions of intelligence. I would like to think there would be a way of combining the insights of these two giants. But we're way away from it at the moment. I mean, I don't think economics is very interested in its past. There are groups of heterodox economists. There are journals of post-Keynesian economics which try to develop Keynes's ideas and also link them to Marx's. But that's not mainstream. The mainstream is going in a completely different direction. Ever since it was mathematicized, then you had the idea that in fact you could reduce society to a set of mathematical equations, and then eliminated any need for moral or ethical discussion. So economics has narrowed down rather than broadened out.
We began, Robert, with Keynes and AI. Let's end with him. As we all struggle to imagine a post-neoliberal age, an age where Friedman or Hayek's ideas were dominant, and invent something else. Can Keynes's ideas about economics, you called them a branch of applied ethics, so I guess in a sense he inherited the ideas of Adam Smith. Can Keynes's idea on economics help us in a post-neoliberal age come up with a coherent economic theology, perhaps, that will also allow us to address this looming problem of AI?
Well, I think you can use Keynes. I don't think he's the complete answer to everything. He lived 100 years ago, and obviously the world's moved on. But what I think you've got to bear in mind with Keynes is the distinction he always was central to his idea between means and ends. Economics was the means. And economics was the means to get us over the hump of necessity as quickly as possible into the realm of freedom. I mean, that was the way he would put it. Now, in order to do that, you have to have the economy going at more or less full blast for some time. Only in that way would you eliminate the scarcity, which is what keeps us away from our utopia. So he wanted a full employment economy. He wanted a growth economy. Now, if we don't get those, then we're always going to be sort of behind the curve that he would have liked us to be on, and that's where we are at the moment. There are some interesting signs. There's lots of Keynesianism around. There's a lot of Keynesianism in Biden, for example, in Biden's anti-inflationary act. But this is a love that dare not speak its name.
In the old days, in Keynes's day, you could call it the New Deal. Now you have to call it anti-inflation.
Exactly. But there is something there. And in our country, Britain, there's this terrible conflict going on. You do have a new Labour government. It wants to get the economy to grow. It says we want the economy to grow. There's been no growth virtually for the last 5 years. We want the economy to grow. But at the same time, we're going to stick to our fiscal rules, and these fiscal rules are very anti-Keynesian. They are rules to do with balancing the budget as an aim, and you can't always balance the budget. That shouldn't be the aim. The aim should be actually to get the economy get a full demand economy. Then the budget will tend to balance itself. But we can't argue this case any longer. And the other thing is, where is the peace dividend? Where is the peace dividend we were promised after the First World War, after the Second World War, after the end of the Cold War? There was going to be a massive peace dividend. Now we're all talking about rearmament.
Well, there was a peace dividend, Robert, after the Second World War, the National Health Service, welfare system, which was a lot of it was credited to Keynes, wasn't it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there was Keynes, there was Beveridge, and there was also, of course, an additional stimulus was a fear of communism.
Final question. Final question, Robert. You've been very generous with your time. I know you need to get back to your business at the House of Lords. You brought up theology a number of times. You've suggested that AI raises the theological question of what it means to be human. Is it possible, perhaps in a utopian or perhaps even more likely a dystopian way, that this AI will create a new kind of religion, perhaps a religion of itself, maybe whether we call it itself or religion built around technology?
No, I don't, because it's not conscious. I mean, what is it that one really means when one talks of an AI? Suppose one talks of a machine which can do everything we can do better than we can do it. Will such a machine have a religion? It's inconceivable that it would have a religion, because it's not conscious. It's not conscious of itself. A religion is a human invention. I mean, no other species have religions. We have religions.
To end, Robert Skidelsky, I always ask this when we talk about AI. We have more and more bots that are replicating human beings. How would you prove to me and our audience that you're human and not just a computer algorithm?
Well, that's the Turing test, but we've gone beyond the Turing test. I think I could prove I'm human because I'm making mistakes in the way I'm presenting my arguments. And you can prove you're human.
I always make mistakes. That's my middle name, Robert.
Yeah, well, that's a good definition of humans. Humans make mistakes. Machines are meant not to make mistakes.
Well, Robert Skidelsky, the author of Mindless, real honor to have you on the show. I'd love to get you back on. So much more to talk about. But you need to get back to your business at the House of Lords. So we'll talk again in the not too distant future, perhaps after the American election. We haven't even talked.
Yeah.
Trump or Harris. Much more to talk about. Robert Skidelsky, Lord Skidelsky, thank you so much.
Thank you.